I'm telling you, man. They be woofing them churros.
None of those. Hey, but none of those five ladies were big that we interviewed.
No, that's why it took her all day. Come on.
Could I see
It took her all day.
It took me a wrong way to get
It
there.
took her all day to find five skinny women down there.
Do me one more favor. Just let me see the churro eating again one time.
Like my man, like Joey, you know how my man be eating hot dogs, Joey Chestnut? That's why them big old women be eating those churros.
Double fist.
No, they be double fish, no churros, man.
Oh, hopefully you're not double fisting your churros tonight. Back to another edition of the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Michael Ween. Welcome back. It's been a while, but welcome back. We've got a loaded show for you guys tonight. An NBA Conference Finals edition of the Raw Prospect Podcast. That is right. We are officially halfway through the NBA playoffs. We're down to the last four teams. We'll get into what's happened over the last week. We'll get into these beautiful matchups that we have for the conference finals, the Final Four in the NBA, the Indiana Pacers and the Boston Celtics in the East, the Dallas Mavericks and the Minnesota Timberwolves in the West. And we'll also talk about the top five players left in these NBA playoffs. And to do that with me tonight is my beautiful co-host, a man of many talents and a man of many obligations other than this podcast. And it's been a while since we've recorded together. Mr. Emmy Nixon, what's up?
Nothing much, man. I had a big week at work last week. That's why I was out for the whole week. But I'm back. We're good. We're getting into this conference finals, man. This is the best time of the year for basketball. There's no question about it. And obviously, I got my Mavericks in the conference finals this year. That definitely helps helps sweeten it a little bit as well.
Absolutely. It's been, of course, a whirlwind for you, but it's also been an eventful past 6 days for me. We'll get into that if we have time at the end, because I don't want to waste time here on the front end of this loaded show. I want to start tonight, though, with our previews. We've already had a game happen. It was a hectic, exciting game, especially towards the end between the Pacers and the Celtics. So I figured we just start with our Pacers-Celtics preview. And then we'll go to the West, and we'll finish up with our top five players left in the postseason. So I think we should start by taking us back to what happened in the Pacers' last series with the New York Knicks, as they beat the Knicks in a Game 7 on the road in New York against what was a decimated Knicks team, but nevertheless, they put on a display of offense like we've never seen in a Game 7. So just your really quick takeaways from what the Pacers were able to do and how they were able to win that series against New York.
Well, I think the style of basketball they play offensively is, it's a little bit comparable to how UConn played this year, kind of that drive and kick offense, kind of quick decision making, fast paced, a lot of passing, a lot of movement, and it puts so much pressure on the defense. This is how basketball is played in Europe, with the nonstop movement and action leading into the next action and so on and so forth. Like this has been something that's been talked about in basketball discourse for a long time, is that the NBA is a lot more, one-on-one focused, and the Pacers have brought that team style of offense over to the NBA, and it has been a revelation, man. Almost 2014 Spur-like, almost like Golden State Warriors from 2016 type. It's been incredible to watch. And I wasn't someone that was like super high on them going into the playoffs, but with how they're defending now, they can score against anyone. So if they're able to get stops like how they have been, then they're going to be a tough out for anybody.
Absolutely. There's been an evolution here with the Pacers, and it's been important to their success in the postseason, getting to the conference finals. You talked about the defense, and look, they're far from perfect defensively. I don't know how you would actually characterize their defense, but it seems like here in the past couple of months, as they've ramped up for the playoffs and actually gotten into the playoffs, they've been able to create stops when they absolutely have to. Rick Carlisle talked about it. We know this Indiana team was much maligned for their defense all year long. And there's been kind of an evolution, relying more upon Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith. Bringing in Pascal Siakam has helped as well. It's been important to what they've been able to do. A more defensive-minded backcourt with Nembhard and Nesmith to go along with their second-ranked offense, and they all of a sudden become a very viable playoff team that's even given Boston everything they can handle tonight. Now, this Boston test, of course, as we know, is going to be a different story, as the Knicks were without almost half their team, maybe more than that. It sucks to see Brunson go down in that game with the fractured left hand late in the third quarter. But at that point, it kind of felt like it was the Pacers' game to lose.
Yeah.
And just what a performance. Tyrese Halliburton was fantastic, especially in the first quarter of that game. 14 of their 39 first quarter points, which was a Game 7 record, I believe. Finished with 26 points, but 6 3-pointers, which were huge. Pascal Siakam, who they, of course, acquired at the deadline, had 20 points. And then you have Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith chipping in for 20 points each. It was pretty fantastic. 67% of their shots were made, an NBA playoff record. And they made 53 total field goals, which were second most in the Game 7. Incredible performance. And now they get to face who we've all thought was the best team in the East coming in, the Boston Celtics. And so we get to Game 1 tonight. And I don't know how much you saw of it. I definitely watched the entire second half. I was tuning in and out during the first half. What'd you think of tonight before we get into kind of looking out to the rest of the series and how it's going to play out? Oh, we lost Emmy. So I kind of take it from here for a couple minutes while Emmy works his way back. It's going to be a different test, as we've seen against Boston. Boston's making their 6th conference finals appearance since 2017. So they have the experience. They have 2 elite wings in Tatum and Brown. They have 2 of the best perimeter defenders left in the playoffs in Drew Holiday and Derek White. What Derek White gives them is just so invaluable. I can't really even describe it. And then Kristaps Porzingis could, of course, return during this series. I think for Boston, it ultimately comes down to kind of staying bought in defensively, being consistent on defense, especially against a team that has been such a prolific offense throughout the regular season, as they rank second in offensive efficiency, and throughout the playoffs against Milwaukee and against New York when they absolutely had to. Boston, with as good as they are on the perimeter defensively, they're going to have to do a good job staying in front of shooters and staying locked in defensively for 4 quarters. And we've seen them struggle at times to do so here in these playoffs. I think Al Horford has done a very good job, filling in his role while Kristaps is out. Make shots, run your offense, and get stops defensively. That ultimately, for me, is what it comes down to for Boston. And to be able to steal game 1 tonight after letting it slip away and then getting it back based on a series of fortunate events and an incredible shot by Jaylen Brown. To see what Tatum did in overtime, how aggressive he was offensively, was extremely impressive for me. I don't know exactly how many points he scored in overtime, but he was very impressive. And in the end, Boston executed in overtime. For me, for Boston, it comes down to execution, because we all know, especially if they get Porzingis back, that they're the more well-rounded, more talented team top to bottom. And if Jason Tatum can have a couple more of these vintage games, especially late in closing, kind of like he did tonight in overtime, I can see Indiana pushing Boston. We already saw it tonight. I can see them getting a game or 2 in this series, potentially pushing it to 7 if Boston doesn't stay focused. There's still part of me that doesn't fully trust this Boston team yet for a variety of reasons. There's just, I think, a feeling amongst the public that some people don't fully trust this Boston team yet. But as Emmy gets back, I've just been kind of talking about my keys to this series and what I saw tonight. Basically, I think it's been a key the entire playoffs, and I'll let you speak after I make this point. Boston's just got to stay bought in defensively. They have to stay focused on defense, especially against a team that's as prolific as Indiana is and is playing as well as Indiana is. I thought it was really impressive tonight to see what Tatum did in overtime. I think he scored, I don't know what it was, 8 or 10
8 or 9.
Yeah, like 8 or 9 points in overtime. I want to see more of that aggressiveness offensively. Jaylen Brown, takes advantage of a series of fortunate events to knock down that 3 to tie the game, to send it to overtime. But ultimately, if Boston executes their game plan and they're locked in defensively, they should win this series in 6. I can see, though, Indiana pushing them to 6 games. Maybe even 7. But I hesitate to say that. But there's still just, as I was talking about when you got back, there's still just a part of me, and I think outside of Boston fans themselves, there's still people who just don't fully trust this Boston Celtics team.
Yeah, and I think some Celtics fans would even back you up on that. Like, there's just been moments where they lose focus. And against Indiana, as you mentioned, like, if you have a few possessions here or there where you're not closing out or you're not getting the defensive rebound, you're going to be down 15 before you blink against Indiana. Like, that's – and with how good Boston is, you can kind of get away with that, but you don't want to have to rely on it. And that's the – like, you don't want to have to rely on having to come back from down 15. And I thought Drew Holiday was really, really good tonight. He was really big for them with, Kristaps being out. They need that support scoring from those other guys in the starting 5. Peyton Pritchard off the bench was good again tonight. I think getting Porzingis back, I think, will be a big boost for them. They just got to kind of survive until he can come back. And every win that they get buys him more and more time.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about X factors for Boston, I think Al Horford is a huge X factor until Kristaps Porzingis can come back. Because when you get Porzingis back, you want him to come back at a point in time where he's fully healed, so that if they get to the finals, like I think they're going to ultimately, although it might not look as pretty as you might want it to. You want him to be as healthy as possible, obviously, so he doesn't re-aggravate something. What was it, a strained calf or something?
Yeah.
I forget what his injury was. But even though he's a 17-year veteran, even though he's, what is he now, in his upper 30s, Al Horford,
38, something like that, yeah.
the on-off numbers are still very good for him. I don't know how tonight factors into this yet, but against the Cavs in the minutes that he played, the Celtics were plus 53 in the minutes that he played, and they were minus 22 when they didn't have him on the floor. So I think he's going to be big. Their defense was a lot better with him on the floor. And so just having
Do you know if Xavier Tillman is healthy? Sorry, that's random, but like he was brought in through trade at the deadline to be their third string center. And I just found it interesting that they decided to go with Cornette.
Yeah, I found that very interesting too. I didn't see him tonight. But I'll look into that.
Look that up.
Yeah, you go ahead and look that up. But against the Cavs, and I know Indiana is going to be a tougher test offensively to defend, as we saw, but their defense was 104 points per 100 possessions allowed with Horford and almost 124 points per 100 possessions with Luke Cornette on the floor. So I think Horford's going to be big for Boston. And then for Indiana, if you had to pick an X factor for them, who would it be? Like an individual player. Who would it be in this series?
To me, it would be Miles Turner.
Yeah.
I think if Turner keeps playing how he played tonight, like he was genuinely dominating the paint and keeping them in the game, like with how he played in that first half. He hit a few threes. He had, a couple of nice post moves in the lane. Former Longhorn, by the way. Shout out to him. But man, like if he can play like that, and I'm not saying he's going to give you 20 every night because I wouldn't expect that. But if he can just give you 13 to 15 points, 10 boards, continue to give you great defense, I think that will be really key in this series.
Absolutely. Is there anything else we need? I'm ultimately picking Boston in 6. I think getting that game tonight was absolutely huge.
Yeah, I agree. They stole one. They really did. And I think I lean Boston in 5.
Okay.
But, man, I think Indiana will be tightly contested in every game. But we'll
do you
see.
think Indiana ultimately ends up getting that game back home where they played very well? Or do you think they'll be on the road?
I think it would be game 3.
Okay.
Or game 4.
Fair enough. All right. Well, let's move to your Mavericks in the Western Conference Finals. But before we get into that series, let's talk about how the Mavs closed out the Thunder, but let's first talk about how the Minnesota Timberwolves closed out the Denver Nuggets in Game 7. So what'd you see in that game? How did the Timberwolves pull it off?
Well, I just think we saw the flaws in this Denver team come to the surface. The narrative before the season was that can Denver's bench with all these young players, be ready come playoff time? And the answer was no, unfortunately. And losing Bruce Brown, losing, Jeff Green, a key guy off the bench for them last year. Some vets that I think were important just in terms of they could be a threat offensively while still being great defensively. Like they could, give you 15 points in a playoff game. And those are the types of things when you can get a bench player to give you 15 points, that's the kind of things that swing series. So they just didn't have that. And you got to give credit to the Timberwolves. They played fantastic defense, especially in that second half. On that big run, they really tightened it up. And I loved the lineup of Naz Reid and Towns together in the front court. I thought that actually turned the tide, in my opinion, that lineup. It really spread out the Nuggets, forced Jokic to defend in space. And once you got the Nuggets in rotation, you can move the ball around and eventually you end up with really good looks. And from there, they hit some really tough shots down the stretch where Denver played great defense, particularly that Gobert 18-foot fadeaway, and obviously that Conley pump fake, step through 3-pointer from the left wing. They had a lot of, clutch buckets, but also they were able to get into that rhythm because of, how they played offensively with their ball movement.
Yeah. I have a lot to say, but I'll make it quick. This ultimately, for me, and I agree with you, but I think this ultimately for me stems from what was, I think, the Timberwolves' design from the start of last year in the vision that they had for this team when they acquired Rudy Gobert. Remember, Tim Connolly was the man who drafted Nikola Jokic. He comes over from Denver, and he kind of reinvigorated that vision with Minnesota. And really, there's no team left, and there wasn't a team, I guess, in the playoffs that could match Minnesota's size. And the only real way to score efficiently on this defense, as good as they are and have been all season long throughout the playoffs, is to go out of your way. You got to deal with all that length, the ferocious contests, trying to score around the rim. It'll be very interesting to see how, like, a super talented guy, like the talented finishers the Mavs have around the rim, how they deal with that length when they're, in the paint. But back to this series, for me, it was Towns, Gobert, and Naz Reid that was really the story of their comeback from, what was it, a 20-ish point lead?
Fantastic. Yeah, it was 21-point lead.
Yeah.
Start of the third quarter.
They just wore down Jokic. It's pretty much as simple as that, to the point where he was so exhausted and so worn out that he really couldn't take over like he probably could have against maybe any other team in that situation.
Yeah.
And credit to them. They punched their ticket to the conference finals for the first time in, 20 years? And we've got new blood in the conference finals with the exception of Boston. I mean, we've got 3 new teams, which I absolutely love to see. But I thought, to close out this part of the conversation, Karl-Anthony Towns was mega impressive on Sunday. He just absolutely made Jokic, I think, fight for every single thing that he got.
That was the best game of his career, in my opinion.
Yeah. When all those bumps and holds, the physical play of Towns got him into a little bit of foul trouble in the fourth quarter. As you mentioned, Naz Reid, who's been very impressive all season long off the bench for this team, tagged in, fresher legs, blocked Jokic's shot twice in crunch time. Those blocks were huge. And it was just Jokic trying desperately in every way that he could to get shots up inside, only to have it, most of them devoured by the Timberwolves defense. And then I think the value of Rudy Gobert not only comes through in like how he guards bigs one-on-one, but it's more so, in my opinion, how he made Jokic kind of second guess himself every single time just with his presence off ball. Wolves are impressive. And then you have Anthony Edwards and what they were able to do offensively. We'll talk about Edwards, I'm assuming, at the end when we do our top 5 players. So we don't need to wax poetic about him right now. But yeah, that was very impressive. Two teams with young stars going on the road in game 7s and winning those game 7s. Just something you don't see every day in the NBA. And I thought the second round lived up everything and more, to what it was supposed to be going in. And hopefully if tonight was any indication, we're going to get even more of that in the conference finals. So your Mavericks, go ahead and talk about the Mavericks and how you think they match up against the Timberwolves.
Well, I think this is going to be a slow, grinded out, physical defensive series. I think this is going to be a series that the old heads are going to drool over. I think both teams have, they keep their bigs involved. I love how both of them keep their bigs involved, particularly with the Timberwolves. Gobert, they trust him they trust to throw it down to him on those switches. And I thought that's something that the Jazz never really did with him. Even with his struggles offensively at times, him just being big and having gravity, throwing it down to him matters because it gets the other team in foul trouble, especially when you have guys switching on to him like Justin Holiday and Christian Brown and all those types of guys. So I really like how both teams, really attack the rim in that way with their bigs. One thing I will say about the Mavericks is I think the one place where the Timberwolves are vulnerable defensively is those short jumpers, particularly driving into the lane and shooting those floaters and short jumpers that Kyrie and Luka like to do. That in-between shot from 8 to 10 feet. The Nuggets weren't really able to get to those spots, but I think with a guy like Luka, his size and strength, he'll be able to do that. That it'll be interesting to watch whether the Timberwolves will send to the ball on Luka or kind of play him one-on-one and kind of just force him to be a scorer and kind of turn off the faucet on all those other guys, the PJ Washingtons, the, Josh Greens, all those types of guys. I think that the latter is the direction the Timberwolves will probably go and try to take those role players out of the game offensively.
Yeah, for me, and once I finish, you could tell me if you agree with this. For me, how did the Mavericks win this series? Of course, you need your stars to perform, but for me, the X factor is PJ Washington. And let me explain why. In that series against Oklahoma City, what do they say nowadays? He stood on business. Like, he was excellent. Whatever the Mavericks needed him to do in the situation that the game called for, he did it. You want to talk about games 2, 3, and 4, where every time it seemed like he touched the ball, it's like his fingertips were like on fire. He couldn't miss. He scored 29, 27, and 21 points respectively in all of those games, and he was very good from 3. I think he shot near 50% from 3 in those games. He was the threat from outside that Dallas needed. Listen to this. When he was on the floor in that series, Dallas was plus 21. when he was off the floor in that series, Dallas was minus 21. That tells you all you really need to know. I thought in game 6, even in a game where he didn't necessarily have as much of an impact offensively, except he played a very important role knocking down those free throws at the end to close it out. When he got matched up against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in that game 6, whether he picked them up in transition or he picked them up on a switch in the pick and roll, I thought his individual defense was phenomenal, like just absolutely phenomenal. He shattered the ball. He didn't really fall for any pump fakes, and he just took up space. And that's part of why the Mavericks acquired him. They thought he was a upgrade over Grant Williams, and he has been that. But I don't even think that Mark Cuban, whoever else is in the front office,
Nico Harrison,
Jason Kidd, I don't think they thought he would be doing this.
Yeah.
In a conference semifinal series against the number 1 seed in the West.
In his first playoff run.
In his first playoff
experience.
Exactly. But the point being is against the Timberwolves, I think he'll spend a lot of time guarding Karl-Anthony Towns. And I think Dallas will be comfortable enough to use him in different ways. They'll be comfortable enough switching him on to Anthony Edwards at times or Mike Conley when in pick and roll situations. And then on offense, if he can continue to have success from beyond the arc, that makes it even more difficult to blitz Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic in those actions that Dallas likes to run. I think he's going to be very, very important. So for me, it's PJ Washington. And then from a Wolves perspective, who would you say the X factor is for them? Not to put you on the spot.
I'm gonna say Jaden McDaniels. I think the obvious pick would be Karl-Anthony Towns, but he's their second best player, so that's a given. So yeah. I'm gonna say Jaden McDaniels because I think him giving them 23 points in Game 7 was very quietly one of the key reasons they won that game. In a game where both teams didn't crack 100 points to get 23 out of a role player that's going to give you who is going to give you elite defense. I mean, that's a bonus. So if the Mavs want any chance to win this series, I think Ant's going to get his, Cat's going to get his. But you cannot let Mike Conley get off, Jaden McDaniels get off, Naz Reid get off. Those are the players that you cannot let, take over, because then you're in a bind because it's going to be tough to score on your end.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious, but I also think Rudy Gobert will play a pretty important part in this series.
Yeah.
The only players to draw more fouls per 100 possessions in this postseason. Wait a minute. What is this stat? Okay. Joel Embiid, Jalen Brunson, Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Nikola Jokic, with Jason Tatum right behind. They're the only players to draw more fouls per 100 possessions in this postseason with a minimum of 200 minutes. And I think staying out of foul trouble, I think his defensive assignments will probably be more traditional in this series, just in a sense that Dallas doesn't necessarily have one of the most singular centers in league history. But I do think with Luka and Kyrie in those pick and roll situations, Gobert might have to kind of help higher on the floor than usual. He's got to be cognizant of all the actions that they run. And then one of the key points of Dallas's offense in these playoffs has been those corner threes
Lobs.
that
Oh,
they've gotten
yeah.
and the lobs. We're talking about, I think it's PJ Washington, Josh Green, and Derek Jones Jr. All those players combined are shooting 39% on corner threes through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, most of which have been wide open. I think some of that responsibility might fall a little bit on Rudy Gobert to help take some of those shots off the table, to allow his teammates to stay home on the other shot creators that the Mavericks have. But he's also going to have to, as you talked about, limit lob attempts like he was able to do at times in the Nuggets series when they would try those actions to Aaron Gordon. You talk about Daniel Gafford, you talk about Derek Lively. I think in a way the Mavericks are going to keep Rudy Gobert's hands full in this series, if that makes sense. And so I think McDaniels and Gobert on that front line are going to be important. But with all that being said, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I got to mention before we finish this preview is the Mavs getting Maxi Kleber back is going to be really big, in my opinion, because he's able to shoot the 3 ball, and I think he's the perfect guy to put on Karl Anthony Towns. He's fantastic on defense, and he has the physicality to stop Towns on some of those drives to the basket that he likes to have. And if you're able to limit that, you can kind of, slow down Towns a little bit. It seems like Denver didn't really have a guy like Maxey to kind of match Towns' physicality. So Maxey getting back, hopefully game 2 or 3.
Absolutely. So as a Dallas Mavericks fan, what is your prediction for this series, which begins tomorrow?
My screen again.
I can still hear you. What is your prediction for the series, if you can hear me? Are you still there? All right. Well, while Emmy works on that, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. This is going to be a great series. I could easily see this going even 7 games. I don't know who I want to pick, honestly, in this series. Do you have a pick as a Mavericks fan? Are you still there? I can see you moving around, but I cannot hear you. All right, well, while he works on that, we'll come back to make our prediction after this quick break.
They're not laughing at you. No, they're laughing at the incident.
The whole incident.
They don't believe these guys.
Charles,
I know why you're laughing.
I played in the NBA for 16 years, and I've been on TV for 18 years. This is the first time I ever heard police presence. They got a police presence? Are you kidding me? Wait, come on, man.
Numerous social media reports that LAPD was called.
LAPD was called.
These two, man.
Come on, man.
You know why they're laughing?
Come on, man.
Because they would.
Oh, man.
30.
Come on, man.
No, the issue
Man,
is
y'all gotta stop it, man.
they would relish
Come on.
for a guy to come in the locker room after them.
Hey, Chuck.
So,
Hey, Chuck.
I don't
Hello,
know what this
police.
is, and I don't know why.
Hello, police. Chris Paul trying to beat me up. This is Blake Griffin. Chris Paul trying to get in the locker room. Get down here and save me. Wait.
Yeah.
Hey, this DeAndre Jordan. Mike D'Antoni trying to get in the locker room.
I certainly doubt that it was Clipper players who were requesting any kind of.
Somebody had to call the police. Two guys who would relish guys coming in their locker room.
Come on, man.
Are laughing at the fact
Jack,
that Chris Paul
police
is
president.
coming to get the police to get Blake Griffin.
Oh, Lord.
By the way, Trevor Ariza's birthday.
I'm sorry, America.
June 30th.
They got a police presence. Oh my goodness, that's one of my favorite. That is one of my favorite clips of Inside the NBA. And I'm still not sure we've heard, like, is TNT going to keep the NBA? That'll certainly be a topic when news surfaces, if it hasn't already. But Emmy's prediction is Wolves in 7. I think I probably agree with him, though I will be thoroughly rooting for Dallas. I'd love to see Luka and Kyrie get to a finals, to see that move actually pay off when a lot of people doubted it. But at the same time, that defense combined with just the way that Anthony Edwards is playing, I probably agree with you, Emmy, that I would lean Wolves in 7. But as I said, I'll be rooting for Dallas. Absolutely. I think it would be one of the funniest things in the world to see Dallas get to the finals, or maybe funny is not the right word, but vindicating for Mavericks fans to see Luka and Kyrie get to the finals, just to kind of rub it in everyone's face who doubted them from the start. If there were I'm sure there were those doubters out there. So that does it for our predictions, unless you have anything else you want to add on. If you can still hear me. Oh, back out. Okay. Well, I will continue filibustering while Emmy tries to figure it out. So I think one of the things that's happened over the past week has been, well, first of all, let me dive a little bit off topic into my personal life real fast. So Thursday, I wake up, I go to work. This past Thursday. Wake up, go to work. Normal day at work. It's a little cloudy outside, but maybe a little drizzly. I can't remember exactly. Here in Houston. And I work on the Beltway. So there's the inner loop. I live in the Heights. Here's downtown. And then the Beltway's out here. And I work somewhere along the west side of the Beltway. And, I go to work. I leave. So I'm leaving work around 4:30-ish. Usually leave between 4:30 and 5. Sometimes I work later. It just depends. And it's pretty cloudy outside, but it looks like it might rain, but it's not raining yet. It's not very windy. So I drive home. It takes me 25-30 minutes to get home. And I get home. I do what I normally do when I get home. I turn on the TV. I make dinner. I eat dinner. Do whatever. Sit down because I wanted to catch up on the PGA Championship, which took place this week. And by the way, congratulations to Xander Schauffele on winning his first major. And my lights start flickering. And I knew there was potential for rain in the forecast, thunderstorms possibly, going into the evening or that day for that matter, rolling into the next day. My lights start flickering. I'm like, oh shoot, is the power going to go out? So I start to hear stuff outside. I start to hear water kind of hit my window or something hit my windows. I have my living room, I have my TV, and then I have 2 doors that open up to my balcony here in my apartment. And I opened up my blinds because they were closed to see what was going on outside. And it's pretty much very dark and it's absolutely pouring. But there were 90 to 100 plus mile per hour winds. High, dangerous, high-speed winds to go along with the tornado that ripped through the area. It was an absolute monster of a storm that came through here in Houston on Thursday night. I'm sure many of you have probably seen it on the news if you're a frequent watcher of the news. But absolute monster of a storm. It knocked pretty much out power across Houston. Over 1 million people were without power. It knocked out some windows downtown. They had water flying in. There were some places with some flooding. Trees down all over the place. Debris all over the place. It was kind of like a quasi hurricane, but with a tornado that ripped through the area. And I was hoping to do a Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports episode Thursday night before the weekend, since I wanted to get out some content before, Emmy was busy with his golf tournament. But that didn't happen. My power went out. And we just got power back here at my apartment yesterday. And so I slept through the night on Thursday. My work's power was out. So I went home to Austin, where my parents live, and spent the weekend there. And I worked from home on Monday, yesterday, as for whatever reason, we still didn't have power at my office. But a lot of people still didn't have power yesterday, to be fair. And then I finally drove back into Austin earlier this morning. So it's been a hectic couple days with that monstrous storm that ripped through Houston on Thursday night as I was just filibustering while you worked on your technical difficulties. So with all that being said, to make up for the lack of activity last week, we're hopefully going to have a couple dit holes and an MLB episode throughout the rest of this week for you guys, since we didn't have much last week. Emmy was busy with work and a golf tournament. I thought I was going to be able to do a dit hole Thursday night, but then a humongous storm ripped through the area, knocked out all our power. I went home to Austin. I slept here Thursday night, hopped in my car since my work didn't have power on Friday. Had to throw out all my food because when the power goes out, your fridge turns off and food goes bad. And I knew I wasn't going to be here. So I threw out all my food. Didn't really have all that much left, to be fair, but water was shut off. There was flooding all over the place. Not flooding here, but in other areas.
Wow.
Downtown, a bunch of windows in those high rises were knocked out by the wind. The winds were much higher than I think a Category 1 hurricane. It was a storm system that really doesn't come around all that often. It was just a weird weekend.
Yeah. Thursday night we got some rain too, but nothing like what you're describing, man.
Well, what you got turned into what we got, but what we got was worse because of the wind.
Yeah.
In excess of 90 to 100 miles per hour.
Wow.
Knocked out power and everything. And then I think that system continued along the East Coast, but I think it ended up hitting Florida fairly hard too, but it hit Houston the worst. And so that's why I worked from home yesterday. Couldn't really do a podcast. Then weird situation. But since you're back and I'm done filibustering about my personal life, let's wrap this thing up with our top 5 players remaining in the playoffs. And so you can start us off.
At number 5, I have Jaylen Brown. I think what he's done defensively for Boston has been fantastic, man. Like I genuinely do not know who their best perimeter defender is, and that's just credit to how good that team is right now. But man, I mean, between him, Drew Holiday, Derek White, and Tatum, I mean, those 4 guys, you can just take the pick of who you want on any given night and just throw them on the best guy on the other team and feel good about it. And not to mention what he does offensively. He's been their most consistent scorer offensively throughout the playoffs. I love how he's attacked the rim a little bit more this year. I think his shot selection has taken a step forward. I think the only thing I would say is questionable about his game at the moment is probably his free throw shooting. But even then, he had 3 clutch free throws tonight. So really, really good season from Jaylen Brown. I think he deserves to be on this list.
Yeah, I had Jaylen Brown on my list too. We're in the same state of mind here. What he does defensively is invaluable. The way that he's been aggressive and scoring these entire playoffs, pretty much been more consistent than Tatum, been one of the more consistent presences offensively. Hit a huge shot tonight. Obviously, that didn't really factor into the ranking, but it just goes to show you like the way he's able to create his shot. I'll have to get his stats, but he's been really good, and he absolutely deserves some recognition for what he's done. I view this as kind of impact on your team right now, but also your current form. You have to be in good form to be on this list. So we agree on that one. So we can move on to number 4.
I found this one kind of tough just because both guys that I was considering, they've been a bit up and down throughout these playoffs. So I ended up with Tyrese Halliburton at number 4 just because of I'll just spoil it. Between him and Jason Tatum, I thought Tatum with his defense, what he does defensively, and also his playoff experience that he brings to the table, I think gives him the edge. I think Halliburton has been, I mean, he's been really, really good, man. He's been trying to figure out like the balance of kind of he has a pass first style, and he's been having to try to balance that because teams have really been loading up for they've been taking away the easy pass from him. So he's been having to be a little bit more aggressive scoring wise in different spots and try to balance those two things. But I think he's finding his way, and tonight was a really big step. Tonight he had a really, really good game.
Yeah, I think I wanted to have a pacer on this list. And I for my list for that matter, I was considering a lot of other guys. But I went with Pascal Siakam here. And I think him and Halliburton are really close. I just think, looking back at that trade with the Toronto Raptors that got Siakam into a Pacers jersey, it looks more and more like a bargain to me by the day. And you look at kind of what he's been able to do this year with the Pacers, 21 points, 8 rebounds, pretty much 4 assists, shooting 55% from the field and almost 39% from 3. those numbers don't like pop off the charts. But I think that's kind of to be expected given that he joined a new team mid-season.
Yeah.
But the increase, in his overall efficiency is definitely an encouraging sign. I just think he's been really good so far in the playoffs. He's had several key performances for the team. He was really good in Game 2 against Milwaukee. Games 3 and 5 against the Knicks, I thought he was really good. You could go either way. But I think that addition moves the needle for me.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
He's been a little inconsistent, but I've always been a big fan of Pascal Siakam. So why not we go to number 3? Who is your number 3 on your list?
Oh man, this is where it gets tough. Well, okay. Actually no. 2 is where it gets tough. But I have Tatum at 3.
Same here.
I actually forgot about Tatum for a second there. For some reason, I thought we were already on number 2. But man, I mean, Tatum is such an interesting player to watch, man. Like, just he has so many moments within games where you don't even notice he's there offensively. Defensively, he's always making his impact. I'm not going to question that part of his game. Offensively, though, I think there's still a ways to go for him in terms of just, using his gravity to the advantage of the team. And I liked what they did tonight, using him as a screener a little bit more often, getting him involved in the action. And that was really, really effective, but that hasn't been consistent. So we'll see moving forward how consistent he'll be. But, getting him closer to the rim on those post-up touches, getting him rolling to the basket, those are the types of things he needs to do more often. I'm honestly I'm tired of him settling for that 3-point shot too much.
Yeah. There's been a lot of discourse around that same exact thing you're talking about throughout the season and throughout the first half of the playoffs. But he was an all-star this year. He's likely to be featured on one of the all-NBA teams. Yep. He was the best player on the best team in the regular season. I think he finished 6th in MVP voting, if I'm not mistaken. There are nitpicks to his game, absolutely, but coming into this series, he's still averaging 24 points per game, 10.5 rebounds, 6 assists. His numbers are good, probably not where you maybe necessarily expect them to be, but he's been good and he's had his moments. Like tonight in overtime, as I mentioned earlier, I thought he was really good. Just needs to stay aggressive and not settle in certain situations. So let's finish out our lists. For me, it was really close, but I went Luka number 2 and then Anthony Edwards number 1.
I had the same.
Okay.
I flip-flopped a bunch of times. Being a Mavericks fan, it's interesting. I have a weird opinion on Luka, I think, compared to most Mavs fans. I think, what he does on offense is absolutely incredible, and the way he sets the table, the way he spoon feeds his teammates with wide open looks. I mean, that kind of stuff is invaluable. You can't replace that. But at the same time, I do feel like from just a consistency with his just mentality towards the game, I think that can be questioned at times. Just there's too many times where he's not playing basketball. He's trying to get a call. And that that cannot happen. Like him trying to get a call and then not getting back on defense after not getting a call. Like those little things that were happening throughout that Oklahoma City series. He's got to take that out of his game, because there's going to be defenders like Lou Dort throughout every single playoff run for the rest of his career that are going to try to get under his skin. And I feel like Lou Dort was successful in doing that, even though he was able to kind of come out of it game 5 and game 6.
Yeah. I think what people are giving Luka credit for, and I think we would agree, is he's playing through a multitude of different nagging injuries this postseason, which has dragged his efficiency down just a tad. I think he's got like a right knee sprain, back soreness, left Achilles soreness. I've heard everything, right?
Yeah.
But playing through those injuries, absolutely. This postseason run to get the Mavericks, to still help the Mavericks get where they are, deserves a lot of credit. Then ultimately battling through a first-round series against the Clippers, and then another series against the Thunder, who were, the second best playoff defense of this postseason, with Lou Dort and Cason Wallace being thrown at him, deserves a lot of applause. And despite all of this, he's still come out to lead the playoffs in assists, averaging close to 10 rebounds, 27 points per game, and a steal and a half per game. His efficiency is down a little bit, but as he continues to get healthier, I think he's going to continue to drive fear into the hearts of his opponents, which, as a Spurs fan, I know too much about that. And then as far as Anthony Edwards goes, what can we really say here? He's arrived. The playoffs has showcased him as, I think, a bona fide superstar from here moving forward. And I think when we talk about the rise of Anthony Edwards to like superstar status, which is I think what he's ultimately going to reach if he hasn't already, we're going to point to 5 years from now. We're going to point to the Nuggets series.
Yeah,
that's the moment.
And he arrived.
We knew that moment was going to come eventually. I don't know if people expected it necessarily to be this year, but it's gotten the Timberwolves where they are, averaging 29 points in the postseason at, what is he, 22 years old? Yeah, it's ridiculous. And he's doing it on great efficiency, 50% from the field, 63% true shooting percentage. He's shown himself to be just a tremendous postseason player at such a young age. And it's extremely impressive. I'm so excited for the NBA that they get to watch this guy for the next, he could play 15 years.
Yeah.
15, 20 years. I don't know how long his career is going to be, but I feel like with his build and the way that I think he'll take care of his body, his athleticism, his strength, I think he's going to age pretty well as long as he stays healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And I just do want to be clear about one thing when it comes to this, Anthony Edwards, Luka debate we're having is like, I think it'll be a game-to-game thing. In terms of who will be the best player on the floor in this series. That's what's interesting about it. I think ultimately it'll come down to, will Anthony Edwards be good enough scoring-wise to force the Mavericks to send two to the ball? Because at that point, sending to the ball, you have Cat, Rudy, McDaniels, all that size and athleticism, playing 4-on-3 on the backside, you're going to get cooked every time. Like that's just with how the Wolves are set up, with how much size they have on the floor. And I think ultimately, he will be able to, dominate the series scoring wise enough to where Jason Kidd will have his hand forced in terms of having to send two to the ball. So that's where I think the Wolves will have the edge. Not to get back to their preview, but I think his decision making, like playmaking wise, in terms of off ball movement, like it's so ahead of schedule.
Yeah. One last question? Did you consider Kyrie at all for your list?
Yeah, I did. I definitely do think he's right there with Jaylen Brown in terms of being the fifth guy on this list.
Yeah.
In terms of impact on the floor, he's been extremely impactful. He's had a weird second round. Not being aggressive in first halves and then turning it on the second half. I don't know if he'll be able to do that against the Timberwolves. I think he's going to have to be a little bit more aggressive early on in these games. Have a couple of maybe like 10-point first quarters here and there to, help sustain the Mavericks offense. And up to this point, he hasn't really shown that. So,
yeah. Anything else as we wrap this thing up?
Well, I'm excited and nervous at the same time for this series. Like, I really do think this is a legacy like, this is where two superstars of a generation clash. Like, I really do believe that. I do think this is part one of many clashes between Luka and Anthony Edwards. Obviously, we don't know what's to come, but I really do think this is the first of many.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would hope so. Like, I hope we get this every year, to be honest. But we might not. I wanted to real quick, as kind of like my parting shot, mention some of these awards that have been announced the past couple of weeks. This can be more off-season fodder, but to be particular about what I actually wanted to point out, Victor Wembanyama today was named, I think, the first rookie ever to make first-team All-NBA in his rookie season.
What?
Yeah, I believe that. I'll double check, but I believe that's the accomplishment. He finished second in the Defensive Player of the Year voting behind Rudy Gobert, and then he obviously won Rookie of the Year as we all pretty much expected him to. Of any of the awards, though, while I double check my Wemby nugget, have any of them surprised you, or have they all been pretty much status quo?
I think no, I think they've mostly been pretty chalky. I think Jokic winning MVP ultimately was the right decision. I don't think there was a wrong decision per se between him and Shea, but I do think Jokic definitely deserved it, despite what NBA Twitter will tell you at the moment. But I'm trying to think. Defensive Player of the Year, there wasn't really any other candidates other than Wemby you could even come close to considering. It feels like it kind of just felt like Rudy and Wemby, and Wemby just happened to be on one of the worst teams in basketball, so it kind of just eliminated him, I think.
Yeah, so the official stat is Wemby is the first rookie in NBA history to be selected to an all defensive first team. However, there have been other rookies that have been selected to all defensive second team.
Okay.
And you can probably guess who those are. Duncan in 98, the Admiral, David Robinson in 1990, Hakeem the Dream in 1985, Kareem back in 1970. And then I think that's it. There might be one more that I'm missing.
I
But
think Wes Unseld, he won MVP his rookie year.
yeah,
Might be him.
but the last 3 rookies to do it have all been San Antonio Spurs, which is pretty
Wow.
interesting.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, I think,
and at first you said All NBA first team. I was like, whoa, what?
no, not all NBA.
Yeah,
I might have said
yeah,
that.
I know what you mean now.
I may have said that. I meant all NBA defensive first team. I don't know when they release the all NBA teams, but it'd probably be soon if they've announced the all NBA defensive teams. Okay, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast, our NBA Conference Finals preview, along with our top 5 players left in the playoffs amongst the 4 teams remaining. I feel like we've got one favorite and then 3 teams that are hungry and vying, like legitimately vying for a spot in the finals, and then also, the chance to win the championship.
Yeah.
So with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. We promise to have a lot more content this week than we did last week. Anything else? Any programming or scheduling notes that we need to make people aware of? Or
Well,
pretty
I
much-
do want to say I solved the problem. For some reason I wasn't connected to like the main Wi-Fi at my house. I was connected to like the secondary Wi-Fi, but I think that issue is resolved. The issue that I had earlier resolved. So that won't be happening anytime soon, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised how good my end of the bargain has held up tonight, given that my power's been out all weekend. And sometimes, when the power comes back and your internet's been off, you can have
Sometimes
difficulty.
it'll be shaky, yeah.
Yeah. So good thing that worked out. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll have another NBA episode probably middle of the series. After the
probably
first
next
2
week.
games. Yeah.
Beginning of next week.
Sunday or Monday next week. We're doing these every week. We've been pretty consistent. But coming up, we've got Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. You're going to want to tune into that. And I'm hoping to get like an MLB Power Rankings episode, as Memorial Day is like the first real standings benchmark,
Right.
of the long MLB season. And I feel like there's enough of a sample size now through a quarter of the season to really talk about what's been happening with a lot of these teams. And I'm hoping to get 2 Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports in this week. There's a lot of recruiting stuff we need to discuss. There's some baseball stuff we need to discuss with regionals starting next weekend. Conference tournaments going on right now. There's football stuff, portal stuff. You guys get the whole deal. So we'll see you next time. But until then, enjoy Mavericks Timberwolves game 1 tomorrow, and we'll see you next.